Kia ora. Today we're going to look at paper, level 2 economics paper 91224 from 2020. If we like it, if we get some value out of it, we might crack through all of the papers in the next few weeks. But let's just see how we get on. Today I'm just going to go through the paper, maybe as if I was looking at it for the first time, what I'd look for, the kind of answers and structures or tricks that I would be doing if I was taking this paper for the first time. However, of course, I've got the benefit of the mark scheme, so I also might refer to that sometimes if it helps. So let's crack into it. Question 1. So the first thing I do when I open this up is I see we're looking at circular flow model, so I'm guessing we're going to need to refer to some of these flows, because that's typically what we do. And so I'm going to read the question with that in my mind of what flows might be relevant here. So I'm just going to bust out this highlighter and let's have a chat. During 2020, the countries of the United Kingdoms, England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland left the European Union, allowing them to negotiate new trade agreements with other countries, including New Zealand. This appears to me, at first glance, like new trade with other countries like New Zealand. The first thing I'm going to look at here is export receipts and import payments. That's my first kind of flag. But let's look at the question. Referring to the producers and the household sectors of the first circular flow, fully explain how increase in trade with markets, increased trade with markets in the United Kingdom will increase growth. So we want to get back to economic growth in New Zealand. So my plan here, and this is the case with every circular flow diagram, my plan is I want to go from an injection or withdrawal and get back to this circle right here. I want to get back to households and producers, specifically so that I can get back to this growth, this key word here, growth in New Zealand. That's where I want to end up, and I'm going to get growth by leading to increased output for producers and pushing this two-sector model. So what I would love to see is a question that explicitly, like this one, explicitly refers to one of these injections. Then I can link that to increased output. I can link that to increased income. I can link that to increased consumption, which is more output. So that's my strategy. I'm thinking, what's the injection, number one? And then number two, how do I push that and talk about households, producers, households, or producers, households, producers. And in this case, that's what the question also calls for. So we're going to be talking about trade with the United Kingdom. It's going to be export receipts rising is actually what we're going to talk about most. New Zealand's an exporting country. We export a lot of our goods and services, like our primary industries, and we're going to be able to sell a lot more goods overseas to the United Kingdom. So my first idea in here is export receipts rising. And in fact, let's write that in down here. Text. Export receipts rising. Okay, so we're sending more produce overseas, we're receiving more exports back. Export receipts rising, and let's pull this bracket out. Export receipts rising because, and we love to get a because in our answer just to show we've got depth, because we are now selling more goods and services to the larger market of UK. So export receipts rising, that's a good start there. And then the next thing we want to do is link it to those producers. As, in fact, we can pull this more down. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. as the exports, as the number of exports rises, more number of producers will need to increase output, because obviously we need to produce more goods. If we're selling more goods, we need to produce them first, so they'll increase their output. This, in order to produce more goods and services, the producers need to purchase those resources, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, from households. And in exchange for that resource being sent from household to producers, they're going to transfer income back. So the next step that we can say, exports rises, producers need to increase output, therefore they need to purchase more goods and services, they need to purchase more resources from households. The number of resources purchase, we don't want to say purchase there, the number of resources needed by the producers from households increases, and therefore the payment for those income also rises. And then probably this might tick into the excessive section because it's just for the achieve part here, but we're still going to go into it. With this increased income, consumers will increase consumption spending from households to producers. This is key here, right? So here is our first sentence, which is export receipts rising, right? In fact, we can say this. This is an injection into the economy. Right, so there's an injection into the economy, export receipts. This causes output to rise. We always want to be saying the word output when we talk about growth from the circular flow. Output is rising. The number of resources needed by the producers to produce that increased output is rising. And then with those increased income, the customer is now going to spend more at consumption. If we think about growth, if we think about this in terms of economic growth, we can say here, the increase in output and money flows represents increased economic activity and economic growth, just to ensure that we're answering that question explicitly at the end. We don't want to leave it up to chance there. We want to explicitly answer that question. All right, that's part A. It's done. And I think that's all we want to do. Tick off the injection, tick off the increased output, refer to the households. That's what the question wants us to do. We're always going to do that just to show we can go through three sectors that oversees the producers, the household. And then we did for extra points back to the producers. So let's look at question 2. The United Kingdom's departure from the European Union allows it to enter free trade agreements with New Zealand. The United Kingdom has many technology firms with highly efficient capital goods production processes that at present are not sold in the New Zealand market. New Zealand firms are likely to be created or expanded to sell into the United Kingdom market or to take advantage of the imported technology from the United Kingdom. On graph 1, illustrate the label this shift of aggregate demand and aggregate supply that will occur over time if New Zealand increases trade with the United Kingdom. Right, so we think about ADAS. In fact, let me see if I can get a text box in here. Let's just write down what we think we're going to need to talk about straight away, because we already know the classics. AD equals C plus I plus G plus X minus M. That's the easy one. The harder one is the AS side, which isn't an equation, but sometimes we just like to remember it for a little acronym. So we've got copy print. So we're going to go COP for cost of production. It's got two P's because you've got population for the second P. You got I for imported raw materials, quite a stretch one. I for imported raw materials, copy, and then print, increase in productivity. IN for the price of, oh sorry, not the price. IN for the amount of infrastructure, IN, infrastructure, and then T for an increase in technology. When we look at this question, there's two things that stand out to me, and they should stand out to you as well when we refer to these things here. So the United Kingdom allows it to enter into free trade agreements. Oh, we've already spoke about this one, export receipts rising. So we can go, we know that, I've got my pen here. We know that X is going to rise because we've already just said that in the last question. X is a component of aggregate demand. So that means we're going to be shifting the AD curve to the right, saying there's going to be an increase in demand for our services. And we know that because the United Kingdom is going to be purchasing goods and services from New Zealand. So we're happy with that. Then when we think back to our copy print, cost of production decreasing, I guess they're going to do, the cost of production is going to decrease a little bit as we get more efficient capital goods and production processes. But the biggest standout one for me is going to be an increase in T. Oh, hang on. An increase in T for technology. And maybe an increase in PR for productivity, because productivity is going to increase because now they've got more highly efficient capital goods and production processes. So an increase in X and an increase in technology. And the technology side is going to cause a shift in our AS curve to the right to AS1. Let me move this off our graph. So there's two things that happen there. They're both pretty clear, but it does take us to remember these acronyms to kind of get our minds around what's going to be changing each time. And then it is not always very clear what the answer is just from reading the blurb. So just practicing that skill of reading the blurb, thinking what are the factors or the components that are changing within this market. New Zealand firms are likely to be created or expanded to sell into the United Kingdom. So that's again here talking about increasing our sales of our New Zealand made products into the United Kingdom market. Referring to graph 1, we'll go back to the question. Referring to graph 1, fully explain the impact on growth from the shift in aggregate demand curve and the aggregate supply curve. We can do that for sure. And we know we've got a classic structure that we've been using a lot and we like to use when we talk about ADS. 4 C's, C, 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 C. Let me drag this down to the paper part here. C, 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 C. So the first one is the cause. Oh, here we go. Cause. What's the reason for the change? Get that information straight from the resource material. Blast it into your answer there. Second one, cause components. Component means how is that cause related to a component of AD or for AS, cost of production or productivity? It needs to be related to one of those things. Cause, component, curve. This is the hint. Refer to the graph. Take that component changing. Tell me about AD changing. Tell me about AS changing. Refer to the graph. Tell me why it's moving, what direction it's moving. Really important to refer to the graph here. And then the last one, consequence. Consequence. Oh, does that feel wrong? It's not right. Consequence. That means what is the relevance to the question and on the change in the graph. So what's the outcome? So in this case, we're thinking about the outcome of, we're thinking about illustrate changes in aggregate demand. Oh, here we go, impact on growth. Obviously it's pretty clear because it's a growth paper, but yeah, the impact on growth from the shift in aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So the consequence is going to be what happens to growth. And then from there, we can literally bang this answer out pretty quickly, and following that structure again and again and again. So cause, we're going to start with, let's start with AD. Why is AD changing? Right, cause, we'll read from here. As New Zealand firms are created and expanded to sell to the United Kingdom, there will be an increase in investment, right? Because these firms are getting created, they're buying capital goods. It's in the little section above there. They're buying capital goods, that's investment. They're creating firms, that's going to be investment. So investment's rising. They're going to be selling those goods to the United Kingdom. So if they're selling goods to overseas, that's exports increasing. So that means export receipts is going to be rising. And then we could mention that we're going to be importing the technology, and that will be expensive, and there might be a little increase in M. However, we don't have a lot of room here. In fact, let's look at the next page. We don't have a lot of room here. We've probably only just got enough room to talk about one cause, maybe two. We don't need to do the mitigating factors here. So we're just going to focus on the things that justify our case. We've shown it's an increase in AD. Let's justify it now. More firms investing, more firms selling overseas means increased export receipts. So we're going to go cause, and then we can literally copy as well from up here. New Zealand, we're going to go and use the text. If I can copy actually. Use this text. Obviously you can't copy in the exam because it's not. Digital. Leading to an increase in overseas sales and the purchase of capital goods. Component. These are this purchase of capital goods is, and then state the part of the AD equation is investment. Use the word investment. Use the letter I, and the increased overseas sales is an example of exports receipts. Receipts. AIPTS. Export receipts rising. Full stop. Export receipts rising. We need to talk about X there. Full stop. So we've linked them to our AD equation. Now we get to state our AD equation as both of these rising. Both of these are components of AD. Get to state our equation here. AD equals C plus I plus G plus X minus M. An increase in both causes, an increase in AD shown on the graph as a shift to the right from AD to AD1. And then so I get just flicking off here. consequence. We're not going to touch consequence yet, because what we're going to do is label. In fact, I've not done that yet. We're going to label this new. We're going to label this new curve, and we're going to label this new curve here as well. And we're just going to, at the bottom here, just call this one y, y1, and then talk about the consequence for both the curves at the same time, because we are a little bit pressed for space and time. So please turn over. Let's go to the next page. Obviously, the next page we're going to talk about aggregate supply and then the change here. Next page. Again, not a lot of writing room here. We might be going a little bit too in depth. So let's just get our forces a bit more concise this time. C, 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 C. My cause is going to be cause new UK capital goods make production. Let's check what they want us to say in the question. Production highly efficient. Cause components. This will increase productivity as more outputs can be produced with the same level of raw materials, e.g. labor. In fact, let's not call rate. Why is that not changing for me? My days. Let's not call labor raw materials of resources. Resources, e.g. labor. This is curve. This causes an increase in AS from AS to AS1, increase to the right from AS to AS1, as it is now more profitable. It's always a nice thing to say in there, more profitable to produce goods and services. With a V in there, actually, services. And then the last component we get to do a double header. Oh, sorry, the last consequence. The double header. Both the shift in AD and the shift in AS will lead to an increase in GDP as the new equilibrium shifts right from Y to Y1. Talk about growth. This represents economic growth. Okay, let's look at question C. Fully explain why the impact on growth from the shift of aggregate demand might be greater than the impact of the shift of the aggregate supply curve. In your explanation, refer to graph 1. Okay, on the right here, I've written down some key words or ideas I'm thinking about when we get to this excellence level question. Those things are, at the top here, the things that might be bigger or smaller, okay? Oh, there's one more thing I want to add into here, which is the word offset. So I'm thinking, how many regions are affected? How many industries are affected? How many people are affected? What's the size of each shift? Is there some flow-on effects that are more drastic in one than the other? Is there a short run effect and a long run effect? And is any of the effects offset by an increase or a decrease? There might be an increase partly and a decrease partly. The second thing I want to do is make sure that when I'm comparing two things, that I don't just list facts and then don't actually say them relative to each other. So the second is a list of just some ideas of what we might say to make sure that we tell the marker we're comparing these two things, we're evaluating, we're not just listing facts. So those things are bigger than, smaller than, compared to, on the other hand, however, whereas are all keywords that you could use to tell the marketer, look at me, I know what I'm doing, I know how to compare two things. So it's not going to be easy. Excellence doesn't just get handed out. It's tricky. You got to think for yourself. There's not a prescriptive answer. There's not a 4 C's. There's not a simple graph. It's about using your judgment to justify which one is bigger or why that is the case. So in this case, the first thing I think of is it's like a 2 versus 1 situation. So if I'm going to go back to this question, this first part here, saying there's no trade agreements, makes me think, okay, we're thinking about export receipts. And then again, they say we're selling more to the United Kingdom. So I'm feeling like they're saying selling more here, they're saying selling more here. And then those two things are going to be long run, hopefully. I wouldn't appear there was any other reason. It seems like there's going to be long run effects. So that's the first thing. First thing is kind of 2 hints at the same cause, 2 mentions of it. So maybe the size of the shift. There's 2 mentions of it. The second thing I'm thinking is highly efficient capital goods and production processes are not sold in the New Zealand market. So that is going to shift. That is going to shift AS. That is going to shift AS. However, capital goods, the purchase of a few capital goods is going to be cancelled out. In my head, I'm thinking it's going to be cancelled out by those firms that are purchasing the capital goods, because the firms that are purchasing the capital goods are then selling to the United Kingdom, because it says to take advantage of the imported technology from the United Kingdom. So I'm thinking we're getting all of these goods, the capital goods to produce, that's going to be offset by the companies that are created to send those goods back to the United Kingdom. Those two cancel out. Whereas, and the United Kingdom is a very big market, whereas the extra sales that we make from our primary industries, the sales that are not benefited by this new technology, they're also going to be overseas, selling overseas. It's not an easy question to answer, this one, but what I would be saying in here is the increase in aggregate demand is going to be greater because, so make sure I'm saying greater, because, and then I'm going to say long run, it's a long run benefit, that's good for me. I'm going to say the size of the shift, it's a very big industry that I'm selling into. I'm going to say there's going to be increased investment, I could say in there. I'm going to say New Zealand is a typically exporting market, so that when we get the opportunity for this free trade deal or a free trade agreement, we're going to be selling lots more goods and services to them like that we typically sell, like our primary industry products. Compared to, there's going to be less businesses benefiting from the increase in capital goods purchased. Even though it might increase some industries, make them a little bit more efficient, it's not going to be revolutionary, or it doesn't state any revolutionary changes compared to just this the market that we're going to have access to. So when I just overall, the main answer that I'm going to be taking is going to be the size of the shift here. I'm just thinking huge number of customers all willing to purchase our products. That's very big. New companies created just to sell into the United Kingdom. That's a big, and it's got investment. So we've got consumers, we've got export receipts and consumer spending, whereas in the supply side, few businesses affected, or maybe less industries affected, and then from that, less industries affected, just less increase in productivity over the whole market. It's tricky. You don't leave you a lot of room here. And then finally, it tells you what to do. So you can't be too far off. If you're talking about aggregate demand and you're saying that it's bigger than aggregate supply, then you're doing the right thing. Use those keywords. How on the one hand, this is happening. On the other hand, this is happening. Question 2, PPF. So the PPF, first thing I think I want to think of PPF is some keywords that I'm going to have to write down. I'm thinking of, when I think of PPF, I'm thinking straight away maximum capacity. I'm thinking straight away maximum capacity, right? What's the total possible output of our economy? I'm thinking limited resources, and that's going to be linked to the next one, opportunity cost. I'm thinking choice. I'm thinking honestly back to copy prints. Now, not all of these ones are going to fit in exactly, but they are going to be include some pretty good reasons for why that curve might shift in and out. And the last thing I'm going to think of is employed resources. Underemployed resources. This is me not even reading the question yet. I'm just thinking these are things that probably are going to come up, so I want to get those written down in my answer to show that I know what's going on. On graph 2, illustrate the increase in an increase in productive capacity, and label this new frontier BB. So I know maximum capacity. And I know that this line here, the PPF, represents the total possible production in an economy. I'm saying the words increase in productive capacity. This is actually a pretty easy question, or pretty clear instructions. Pop this out here, and this is nice, and then this is B, and it wants to do that, and this is B. And this is B. So let's look at the next one. Fully explain the shift you have made in production possibility frontier. Include 2 economic reasons that could cause a shift, given an appropriate example for each. Right, I'm going to go straight to copy print here. I'm thinking, what are my options here? Cost of production decreasing. That's not really what we're looking for here. We're looking for copy print. We're looking for increase in, I think I could go here, increase in population. Increase in population could shift us out, more people producing more goods. I'm thinking the last one, technology. So more technologies mean that we're more efficient, increase in productivity. Maybe increase in infrastructure could work here as well. Maybe an increase in resources, although and that's the answer scheme does say resources. I personally don't love resources because it's not really often we're getting access to new natural resources, and it's not really a way that the government tends to go. It's not very popular to start mining deep sea oil, or open up nature reserves to mine for coal, or something like that. It's not very, at least in New Zealand, it's not a very popular choice. Maybe more so in America. So 2 reasons for the change. So fully explain the shift you have made to the production possibility frontier. Include 2 economic reasons. So I'm going to say, I've shifted the curve from A to B outwards. This is because we have now increased our ability to produce goods and services, or our total possible ability to produce goods or services, meaning we can produce more consumer goods or more capital goods, or a combination of more of both, with our current resources. See, again, resources is tricky. We're able to produce more goods and services. Two reasons for this might be: one, an increase in technology. For example, AI means that office administration can be done more quickly and efficiently, meaning less hours are used for the same output. It's a perfect example of technology and productivity. Number two is an increase in population. This is because, great word to use in economics if you're thinking, oh, how do I get into that next line? This is because more workers available means that they can produce more output, increasing our total possible production or productive capacity. These are questions that could easily be asked, or they could easily ask about increases in technology or increases in population, and ask you to justify why they might cause a shift. The next one is a question about GDP. So we look up to B up here. Compare and contrast real GDP, gross domestic product, and net social welfare as measures of economic growth. Fully explain the strengths and weaknesses of real GDP compared to net social welfare as a measure of economic growth. Why net social welfare may be a better measurement of economic growth than real GDP based on its strength and weaknesses. You need to just study and revise this. There's not many tricks for real GDP, nominal GDP, talking about net social welfare. Typically, you just want to have some examples in your locker that then you can bring out if you want to talk about strengths and weaknesses, or you can bring out when you talk about advantages and disadvantages, or bring out when you want to talk about comparing. Remembering some examples is a good way of doing it. So let's talk about strengths and weaknesses of real GDP compared to net social welfare. So comparable and measurable are the two biggest strengths of real GDP. There's pretty consistent measurements across nations and across years because they're just counting up numbers to get that total value for nominal GDP and then doing the math on inflation. So strengths, measurable and comparable. And those are two pretty good strengths. That's why GDP continues to get used in the real world. You can't neglect those strengths. Those are good strengths. Compared to net social welfare, because it does ask you to do that, compared to net social welfare, not very easy to measure because lots of it could be opinion, like happiness. Lots of it could be hard to measure, like homelessness or disease. Lots of it could be mismeasured by other governments, like they might estimate their statistics, and they might be hard to trust. Compared to net social welfare statistics that might be like infant mortality or education attainment rates. Harder to measure, harder to keep consistent, and then harder to compare. Also because countries just measure different things. Some countries might measure schooling up to the age of 14, some up to the age of 18, some university degree achievement. Some people might measure infant mortality as a 1-year-old, or up to 3 years old, or up to 5 years old. Tricky to measure between those countries if they're not calculating the same statistics with the same parameters. So strength of GDP measurable and comparable. Weakness of net social welfare is not those things. Then we flip it around. What's a weakness of GDP? It doesn't measure anything except for the increase in real output. It doesn't measure the quality of the goods and services or how much good they do in society. So, for example, a building of a prison is measured the same as the building of a school when you measure real GDP, even though the outcomes of those two things are going to be quite different in the economy. It doesn't measure inequality. Okay, so one person, if Elon Musk moved to New Zealand, we might double our GDP, but no one's better off except for that one person. So it doesn't measure inequality. It doesn't measure lots of non-financial statistics like happiness or health, which are still really important to the people in the economy. And so you've got to frame those two things again, saying on the one hand this, on the other hand this. When it says compare and contrast, you've got to be hitting those same words to say I'm comparing. Second part, why net social welfare might be a better measurement of economic growth and real GDP based on its strengths and weaknesses. So then that's a final conclusion paragraph saying what they want you to say. They want you to say economic growth is better. They want you to say net social welfare is better. So you want to say something along the lines of net social welfare is better because it's better for measuring the average person. It's better for measuring those the most needy people in our society. It's better because it measures the things that we want to measure as an economy, the things that we find important, not just gathering wealth for our richest 1%, but actually happiness, health, how do we look after the poorest in our society. You've got to use those words. However, whereas, on the other hand, to compare those two things, and then you want to make sure you affirm the choice that's been outlined by the marker. If in your paper it doesn't have a choice outlined that says explain which one you think's best, don't give me 50-50. Lock one in, write your answer, right? Just lock it in. Sometimes they can both be right, sometimes you're not sure. Don't say maybe this, maybe that. If it says which one's better, tell them one's better. Don't flip-flop. Let's go to the next question. Question 3, port locations and economic growth. Recent public discussion has focused on the movement of Auckland Port to another region. Existing port faces traffic congestion, environmental issues, limited opportunities to grow, and inefficient export support services. We're going to come back to all of those things. The value of the cargo passing through the port is approximately $25 billion annually, mainly from imports. The port employs 600 workers directly and thousands more indirectly. Any new port will require investment, that's a key word for us, in railroads and other supporting infrastructure, key word for us, as well as vacant land resource to allow for more future expansion and the setting up of export and import support industries. Compare and contrast, however, whereas justify the reason why you're choosing one. Compare and contrast the possible impacts for New Zealand's economic growth if the Auckland port is moved to a new location. For example, Northport at Marsden Point, Northland. In your answer, fully explain 2 positives and 2 negatives for households, 2 positives and 2 negatives for firms in the new location, long-term benefits for the New Zealand economy from the movement of the port. Again, look at all this space. Look at all the space that they give you. There's not going to be an explicit formula for this answer, right? Except for we're going to hit all those bullet points. We're going to make sure we're ticking all of the requirements for the marker. And then finally, we're going to make sure we're referencing this resource material. Of course, we're going to reference that. Reference the resource material. Reference the question down here, which is our bullet points giving us our structure. And then link back to this. We need to always be answering this question. That's our 3 parts. So we'll start down here. 2 positive and 2 negative impacts for households in the new port location. 2 positives and 2 negatives impacts for the households in the new port location. I think what we want to do is look back to this resource material for the positives and negatives, which is to say, households positives. So in the new region, if I think households positives in the new, right, let's go with green here. The value, okay, the port employs 600 workers daily and directly and thousands more indirectly. I'm going to say that's positive for households. Positive for business is going to be investment in railroads and other supporting infrastructure. Right, that's going to be pretty positive for businesses. New businesses are going to get more infrastructure to help move their products around. It's going to require, and we're going to draw the negative a little bit, and say the existing port faces traffic congestion. And we're thinking, okay, well, it's going to be for businesses. We're going to talk about households. For business firms in the new location, 2 positives is going to be more traffic more workers, more traffic, more people coming to your business. So two positives. Here's all the positives: more people, more customers, more infrastructure to help me transport my goods and services. For households, it's going to be more jobs, more job security, greater opportunities for promotion or increasing your incomes. And then for businesses, it's going to be lots of workers. It's going to be investment in local infrastructure. It's going to be setting up of export and import support industries. So just basically lots of opportunity. Then if we go to the negatives, let's do pink here. For the negatives, it's going to be all of these things, right? Now Marsden Point's going to get all these things: more traffic, more environmental issues, limited opportunities to grow. It's probably a bit more of a stretch one. And then maybe there's going to be a time when there's strained support services, and we can do that for the households and the businesses. Is there might be a time where there's less doctors, less schools, or schools are fuller, the police are stretched, the nurses are stretched because of the increasing growth, the rapid increase in growth. For businesses, it might be that it's quite a small town. It might be small, low access to workers, especially if they need quite a lot of workers. They have low access to workers, low access to skilled workers, and then we're going to have to track them out of Auckland to Marsden Point. For two negatives. Pollution's always a good one for negatives. Congestion's a good one for negatives. Job security is a good one for positives. Increasing infrastructure is a good one for positives. It takes reading the resource material. Definitely quote the resource material. Use your imagination. Things can be a bit stretched. It's not always a financial, economic answer. But just get those positives and negatives down. And then the long-term benefits to New Zealand economy of the movement in the port is going to be, in the long term, the shift is going to, well, I think you can say the shift is going to benefit the new region, because we're going to get, these guys are all going to be better off. In the long term, the shift will benefit the new region because the businesses, the households are all better off, and it reduces some of those problems outlined at the start. And then the second part, which is probably a better idea, is to say that the movement of the port takes a region with low resource use, right? For example, all the land or nearly all the buildings are going to be single-story buildings, right? So that land is used by one company or one family. And it's going to increase that land usage by tenfold, because you're going to start getting a few high-rises in there. You're going to get highly efficient ports and all those systems in there. You're going to get businesses associated with the port all working there. The resources of land is going to be used much more efficiently, rather than just producing local dairy and whatever the local farms produce. Whereas in Auckland, the land is already super utilised. We've got high rises with 200 businesses on one block of land. So it's going to spread that growth out. So there's not going to be one region super employed and one region not very employed. They're going to come back to closer to the similar amount of employment. So Marsden's going to see an increase in resource utilisation. They're going to move closer to the PPF, and then Auckland's going to move a little bit away from that PPF, and spread the economic growth around the regions, which is a pretty good answer. You want to say both of those points. You want to talk about the benefits to Northland and the benefits to the economy of spreading those answers, spreading that economic growth around. So that is the entire paper for 9122 for 2020. If you have any questions, just put a comment on the video, and we might do another one soon. Thank you.